Welcome to the Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers of Washington in its monthly author showcase. I am your host, Mark Miller. Author and columnist Donna Lee Anderson is visiting with us this month at the Bremerton Kitsap Access Television Studios. Donna is a very experienced writer and has a weekly column in the Kitsap Weekly, published by Sound Publishing. She is also the author of 2 novels and a reference book for writers. Donna, welcome to Claw and the BCAT audience.
Thank you.
Now,
thank you for inviting me.
If you could start out with and kind of tell us about how you started writing this local column about authors, because you kind of beat us, Claw, and BCAT.
Sorry about that. I used to live in Hansville, and I wrote a column for the Hansville, it was in the Kingston Community Press, called Hansville Happenings. When I moved to Paulsbo, I told my editor that I was going to be moving, but I could still write that column. And he said, no, I've got something else in mind for you. Would you be interested? And that's how I got to be Bookends columnist about a year ago.
So how many authors do you think you've interviewed so far?
I write a column a week. So far, I'm just submitted column number 49.
Okay.
So,
some of your columns include comment and inspection of the works of more well-known authors, such as a recent column on remembered quotes from Ray Bradbury, Anne Frank, and Marcel Proust. What prompts you to write those types of columns?
I'll tell you the truth, is when I don't have an author to interview. Sometimes I have 4 or 5 authors every week. You know, I get all these books that they send in to the editor, and I have a problem scheduling them all, so I can do 1 a week, and then it's feast or famine, and so I have these other columns in mind. This last column was about the quotes from the books that tell you something about the author. And then there's other things in the literary world besides just writing a book and an author, like The Barn, which is the Bainbridge Artisan resources in Bainbridge. Those all have to be addressed, and things happening around town, readings of authors that I maybe already told you about their books in another column.
So anything to do with literally the literary world?
That's the gist of my column, anything literary. So anything that catches my eye, literary, poetry. I've been getting a bunch of nonfiction books, which is very interesting because the last one I got was on nutrition. So it's interesting to interview the author to find out what made them, start a book on nutrition. And this book I think maybe next week it'll be in the column. Has a bunch of recipes and how to use these things that are supposed to be good for us and nobody eats because you have no clue what to do with them if you had them, And so very interesting. This is probably the best gig I've ever had.
Well, if you're writing also things like that, it's kind of providing a little bit of a public service too.
Right.
If you're actually doing a little bit
Plan
of
A.
health stuff. Yeah, there we go.
Plan A.
Prior to your column, you also wrote a couple of novels. Can you give the viewers an overview of the 2 novels and kind of what prompted you to write them?
Sure. This is my first book, I'm Just Curious. I had a friend who was doing internet dating, and I had this idea of this woman who wanted to go to her 25th high school reunion, and she'd had a very ugly divorce and all of her friends knew about it, so she wanted somebody to go with her that would knock the socks off those people. So her sister says, why don't you try internet dating? And she said, yeah, sure. Well, I don't really want to do that. Well, her sister talks her into it. And my friend was dating on the internet, and she gave me all these descriptions of these interesting men that wafted in and out of the dating world, and they're pretty much all in this book, and she does end up with Mr. Wonderful to go. My second book, I've commandeered Vashon Island and call it Havenport now, and I've moved the cliffs from the north side to the south side, and I have a retirement home in the middle of the island, and this book is set there. We all know the lady who would be in charge of the world if you just gave her a chance. Well, she lives at this retirement home, and she thinks that the lady who works in the office, Emily, would be much happier if she had a man in her life, so she forms Project Emily, and she has a surveillance committee to see if she's happy after the dates and a procurement committee to get her dates. And do you want to talk about these books too?
What was I going to get to next? But first, so
This one?
the Project Emily, I would say was definitely lighthearted.
They're both
They're
lighthearted.
both lighthearted.
They're called beach reads.
Beach reads, okay.
Yeah, if you take it on the airplane, you know, and you forget it on the airplane, it's no big deal.
No.
It's,
Okay.
so
Oh,
they're summer reads.
but in addition to that, you also wrote a reference book for writers.
I
So can you
did.
talk about that?
This book, Necessary Words for Writers, when I was about to retire from the business world in Seattle, I decided I was going to try to write for publication. And because I'd been in the business world so long, I decided I really needed to go somewhere and learn about the business of writing. So I went to a writers' conference in Edmonds, and it's called Write on the Sound, and they still have it. And they had panels, and they had people teaching things about writing. And so many of the words, I understood the word, but I didn't understand the context of what it meant to the writing world. So I started making a list, and pretty soon I had about 400 words. And one of my writing groups said, why don't you write it in a book? And I thought, hey, why not? So it also is lighthearted. I don't do anything very heavy. And it has things like, for instance, if your editor or your agent asks you for a bio, they don't mean a resume unless you're writing a nonfiction and your resume has to do with whatever you're writing. So it's the words that you understand, but you need to know how they refer to the publishing world. And that's my book. And I have another list, but I don't have quite enough for another book. So
So you're going to have a second book on words.
yeah, as soon as I get enough words.
Oh, okay. And then you've also got two other books there also.
Well, I teach a writing class. In Hansville, I had a memoir writing group, and we've been meeting for about 12 years. And they decided 2 years ago that they wanted to write fiction too. I decided, why don't we put some of these in an anthology? And that's what this book is, the stories from the Hansville writing group. It's some fiction, some memoirs. We had it out before Christmas, so everybody bought for all their family. And so it's some very serious topics and some not quite as serious. One lady who is well in her 80s wrote about her husband going on a business trip with her husband over one of their anniversaries. And on the way home, they had car trouble, so they stopped at a motel and spend the night rather than go on in the nighttime with the car having problems. And it started to rain, and her husband took her outside, and they danced in the rain for their anniversary. So that's one of the stories. They're all just very sweet stories, nice stories.
That is a nice story.
And then this one, I entered a contest. It's called the One Sentence Stories. You were supposed to write a story with no periods and no semicolons and no colons in the story. And you'd be surprised, some people wrote 4 or 5 pages of story. Mine is only a page long, but it's a one-sentence story, commas,
Oh.
but no breaks in the sentence. and I was lucky enough to be put into the anthology, and
Cool.
so I just wanted to show that too, because that's a fun read.
Years ago, when I was going to college in an alternate universe, they one of the instructors told us once that Victor Hugo apparently at one time had the longest sentence, and that was in My Lady of Notre Dame, which is the Hunchback of
Yes.
Notre Dame here in the States, because they needed a catchier title when they released it over here. Apparently he has one chapter, this one sentence, non-run-on, that describes the Notre Dame Cathedral and the areas around it. And I don't know if that still is the record or not.
Well, I don't
but
know. Now this
yeah.
book is published.
That's
they may
true. I
have-
was going to
they
say
might
maybe
have
you beat it.
my writing group, I still belong to a writing group, and one of their big complaints is that I write, my paragraphs are all too long, one sentence. My sentences are way too long, so this contest was right up my alley.
There you go. During your life, what experiences in your life kind of pushed you towards being a wordsmith or an author?
Well, I think I don't remember never writing. When I was a child, my father was a logger, and we lived in a logging camp. And I was 7, and my sister was 2, and I used to write stories and make her sit and listen while I read them to her. And so that's my earliest memory of writing full stories.
So you had a captive audience.
Well, now she tells me, or she did tell me one time, that she thought she had to listen to me. It was a way to learn how to go to school.
Oh, there you go.
So I think I've always written, but I didn't try to get published until after I retired.
Where was the logging camp at, just out of curiosity?
Idaho, northern Idaho.
Oh, okay.
Priest River area. And when my children were young, I used to write them stories for on their birthday. Instead of a birthday card, I would write them a story about whatever was going on in their life right then. So I pretty much always written, just nobody cared.
Well, just about every single author and writer wants to eventually see something they wrote in print. When
Yeah.
you decided that you wanted to try to publish some of your writings, how did you first go about it?
Well, I sent out 2,000 or 3,000 query letters for these books, and I got lovely letters back. All of them were form letters. I think they all had the same form letter writer. This will not fit into our projects at this time. And so both of these are self-published. I found a publisher who would print them, print on demand, it's called. They would publish them, and they did for a small fee. I think the covers were only $25. They advertised them in the local newspapers when they were published, and that was it. And just the other day, I got a $2.54 royalty check. So, you know, quite lucrative.
But but you see, you're a published author.
True, true. Well, and I really didn't know if anybody would want to read it, you know. They say one of the things, a death knell, is to give it to your spouse to read and then do whatever your spouse says. Well, that would have been a death knell for me, because my husband picked it up and he read the first 10 pages or so, and he said, "I don't read this crap." And so, so now, but people have read it. I've sold a few books. I am not by any means Debbie Maycomber or Jay Jantz, but
But you're getting there.
well, if I live long enough, I'll get
No,
there eventually.
Now a little bit more kind of a personal experience involving myself. A while back, you discussed with me a current novel in progress about a retired Homeland Security official and her experiences of local crimes and murders. Can you explain some of the plot discuss the characters and how far along you are with that work now?
Sure. That's actually how we met. Was I found out you were Homeland Security. I pounced on your knowledge base. This in this book, in my retirement home, there is a lady who has had an accident on her Harley, and her only relative is a male nephew. And he takes her to Havenport to recuperate at the retirement home because his bimbo wife says, no way is she staying with us. So the day she arrives on the island, a body washes up with the earlier ferry. And so when she arrives, the sheriff's office is down by the ferry dock looking, inspecting, whatever. And she notices it, and then she goes on to the retirement home, gets settled. She is retired Homeland Security. I found out that you have to retire from Homeland Security when you're 57. And so she was still pretty young. The FBI, I've written a couple of short stories before this involving her. The FBI used her a lot in some of their undercover things that they needed help with. And now she's had this wreck on her Harley, and she's here. And it turns out that the sheriff is a retired FBI. And although they didn't know each other, they both work for the government FBI, and ta-da. That's how she gets involved.
And so when can we expect this to come out?
It is finished. It's being edited right now. Plan A, it'll be out sometime in the end of October-ish. I'm going to self-publish it also.
Okay. And you've already mentioned your involvement in 2 local writing group. Can you kind of provide some insight as to the kind of the type and function of the writing groups you're involved in, and maybe give a little bit of advice to people that may be looking for a writers group, and what would you would look for?
I'm big on advice.
Yeah.
My advice to people who are just starting to write is to find some other writers that are also in the same position you are, and maybe some that are published, and make a writing group. The Barn in Bainbridge has a lot of meetings where they invite writers to just commingle and see if you want to form a group. And if you want to do the editing sort of thing, you need an editor. But I think book groups or writing groups are invaluable. And I would suggest you go to writers' conferences. There's several of them around. Some of them are quite expensive, but they offer a great deal. The Pacific Northwest Writers Association is just about to have their conference, and they have many agents there that you can talk to about your book. They have editors that you can talk to about your book. They have a lot of good classes. Gig Harbor has one, writers conference in conjunction with Tacoma Community College. I think that's in November. Edmonds has one, that's usually in the spring. Wenatchee has a good one. Leavenworth has a good one. Writers conferences are very valuable to learn the craft. And no matter what anybody says, you can write your heart out, but you have to learn what is selling if that's your goal. You have to learn what is selling, how to get it on the paper so the reader doesn't put it down after the first chapter and say, no, that doesn't get me there. Feedback, and then there are the beta readers. You know about beta readers?
Yeah.
After you finish your novel, quite a few people I know, authors I know, A.C. Fuller is one of them, has beta readers who reads the first 10 chapters, and then maybe the 10 through 20 chapters, gives him feedback of, I don't understand how, or how come this, or whatever. Things that the author, you get so involved with your characters, you forget that everybody doesn't know this guy's got a speech impediment because you haven't really shown it much, you know. And then all of a sudden he's stuttering and everybody's saying, what happened? So, that's good feedback from the beta readers and book groups.
Would you say, at the same time, though, you have to ensure that you keep your own voice, and
Oh,
you
yes.
don't have to, you don't start writing just
Because
a certain way
somebody
because
else-
somebody else wants you to write that way.
That's true. That's true. And I've heard of people who read, for instance, I met a fellow who read all the Patterson novels he could find and then started writing his mystery because he wanted to write like Patterson. His book was terrible because he didn't really understand plotting or anything like that. You have to learn the craft, and then you can write like anybody, but write your own voice. That's what everybody wants to read if they meet me. They know my novels or my stories are going to have some fun in them, because that's the kind of person I am. If I write like J. Jance, she writes a lot of humor too, but it's not going to be the same. It's going to be a poor man's Jance, and I don't want to do that. I want to be me. And that's what I would encourage every author, to be yourself. Write your own story, and then get a good editor. You're going to have to pay for an editor, but it's well worth it. I know your daughter-in-law, your sister-in-law might be somebody who's willing to do it, but you need a professional.
Getting back to the PNWA, I kind of lucked out because I went and pitched some of my potential works last year, and I actually found an editor who liked something, and so it's in the process now of going through all the various edits and everything to the publisher that she works with. So, and that's true. If you can find yourself an editor that likes the way that you write, then they're a gold mine, because then they can help tweak it, And like I've gotten some nice rejection letters. It says,
Me too.
yeah, I've lucked out. I haven't got any nasty ones lately. Most of the ones I've gotten along the lines of, well, like one of them said, I really thought I could use this story at this time, but I really just can't. And then, with the idea of, but at the same time, somebody else may. And that was right after I'd gotten contacted by this editor and offered a contract. So I wrote her back a nice letter saying, well, what you said was true. Somebody did like it, and everything. So would you probably say then the whole idea of writing, though, is also just to keep writing?
Well, and that's one of the problems. If you write your first book, and to you it's your baby and it's gold, and nobody wants to publish it, and you think, oh, I'm a failure. Wrong. First books aren't usually as good as second and third books. It's just the way it is. It's like learning to walk. You don't walk very good at first. You get better at it, and it goes good from there on. So I would encourage you not to be discouraged. Write your first book. If it doesn't get published, if you try and it doesn't get published, write your second book. Try that. If it doesn't get published, write your third one. I don't think anybody has ever said you have to publish everything you write. Goodness sakes, I've got short stories up the arm, and maybe I'll publish a book someday with short stories, but maybe not. Sometimes you get an idea and it's only a short story, not a novel. And you just write. Writers write.
If someone wanted to meet with you to discuss writing in your literary works, how can they contact you?
Well, they can, my email address, do you want me to tell you?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll tell you and then I'll spell it. It's welltoldtales@aol.com. WELLTOLDTALES@aol.com. And I welcome all people. I'll direct you if I can, help you if I can.
I'd like to give you the chance of the final word here to the BCAT audience. Anything you'd like to pass on?
Well, if you know of someone, a child that is a fledgling writer, don't be their critiquer. Every story that a kid writes is not perfect. They haven't figured out how to do it yet. Just encourage them to keep writing. I found a couple of my notebooks that my mother had saved when she passed away that had some of my stories in them. They're really, really, really bad. But I was 7 years old, for goodness sakes, you know, so everybody can't be perfect when they start out. Teenagers, it's a good thing for teenagers to write too. They don't have to be stories so much as journaling is really good. Help get over some of the angst of growing up. I think everybody should write. Not everybody wants to, but it's cathartic sometimes, and sometimes it's just plain fun.
Well, thank you, Donna, for coming over to the studio
Thanks
and
for
allowing us
inviting
to interview this. Your creative abilities are going to be inspiration to a large group of people out there. And I think we all are going to look forward to reading your future columns about authors and writers.
Thank you.
I would like to thank all of our viewers for tuning into Bremerton Kitsap Access Television and viewing this Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers production. I also wish to thank the BCAT staff on camera and in the director's chair. Our next broadcast is scheduled for July on every Saturday at 6 p.m. when the fascinating artists of Kitsap County will grace your TV screen. This television production can be seen on Wave Cable Channel 3, Comcast Channel 12. You may also see recordings on YouTube. Just query Claw or Peter Stockwell. So keep in touch with our Facebook pages to see what Kitsap author we are interviewing. I hope everyone has a pleasant day and a productive and fascinating year. Until next time, I am Mark Miller with Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers in conjunction with Bremerton Kitsap Access Television. Good day.